think Chad would now like to briefly address the board with respect to hands and wrist.
Good morning, Your Honor. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk today. Before I was to speak directly to my family and those affected by my crimes, there are a few things I'd like to say beforehand to some other parties. I'm by now thoroughly disgusted with the officers and the prosecutors who have invested this case, as well as the fast and loose way that the media has reported on it. For example, reporting that there was alcohol at a family dinner, Mormon family dinner. Reporting that the premeditation, the guns, the bombs, wanting to kill authority figures, all of that crap. I suppose that I was naive coming into this thinking that the system is more often fair than not, that it would operate at high ethical and moral standards, particularly when a man's life is potentially at stake. Don't worry, I am naive no longer, and I have no illusions about those high and moral ethical standards anymore. The true colors of the lead detectives shone through very early when they came to question me in Oregon while I was in the hospital. I had barely come out of anesthesia. I literally had only been awake for a minute or two. I had no idea where I was. I had barely had any idea what my name was. Lo and behold, Detective Bartlett walks in and starts to question me. I initially told her that I was confused and to come back later. I was really confused. Did that stop her? Of course not. She continued to ask her questions until I finally just asked for a lawyer. Of course, I had to ask more than once before she finally left. Questioning a barely conscious suspect, it might be legal, but I find it sleazy. Throughout the entire investigation, the detectives have routinely held back evidence for absurdly extended periods of time, as well as potential death penalty mitigation. Nearly every time I was in court, I would press my lawyers to ask the judge about any discovery and my concern lack thereof. Almost every time, we were assured by the judge that things would be turned over in a timely manner. Really, timely manner. When I pled guilty 2 weeks ago, that morning I was handed over discovery that was produced almost 7 months ago. I don't think that qualifies as a timely matter, at least to me. Not to mention the 40-minute tape recorded statement from one of the inmates that I allegedly confessed to, one of your reliable sources, we still have not received, which goes all the way back to March as well. I think both these examples is an unfortunate proof of how the state attempts to hold all the cards, retains evidence longer than necessary in an attempt to gain the upper hand. It's apparently a routine practice. Again, I had the naive thinking that the system was supposed to be fair and equitable. Potentially more damaging was the anti-mitigation work that the state was engaging in, holding on to family statements longer than necessary, as well as intimidating my biological mom, whom my legal team found as part of their mitigation work. That was the one that really pissed me off. When my lawyer first made contact with her as part of my mitigation work, trying to find out about medical history, possibly, and mental health history in my family, he explained he was my attorney, and he explained his reason for calling. Afterwards, when the family called the detectives to confirm his story, saying that they were concerned, the detective told him to be careful, lock all your doors, and don't talk to strangers. Needless to say that my lawyers never got a meeting with her. We've never heard back. How would that make you feel? I've never really grown up with a desire to know my biological parents because my own mother and father, who I consider my mother and father, are the best parents anybody could ever ask for. But in this case, it broke my heart knowing that possibly any further communication in my life would be trumped because the detective wanted to keep her away from us and from anything that would help us. It's absolutely disgusting. It's even more ridiculous because, of course, the lawyers know who my attorney is. So when they call her... Another thing that really gets me fired up is the prosecutor trying to force me to give away my confidential health records as well as personal interviews with my mental health staff. These are super personal pieces of me that I didn't want to give away. Personal family stories and life experiences that mean a lot to me but have nothing to do with this case. Maybe they falsely hoped that there was a confession hidden inside somewhere. So because I didn't want to give them up, the prosecutor attempted to rip them away from me. Another thing that gets me fired up, really fired up after hearing my aunt and my uncle talk, is the police saying that they supposedly have 2 super reliable witnesses in prison that I confessed to all this premeditation, that I'd been planning this for months. I would like you to know that their reliable witness and their evidence is based on 2 inmates at a mental health prison that I was at. The first, Henry, and I've read both their statements, by the way. The first, Henry Maynard, is on Social Security because he is schizophrenic and an admitted crack user and alcoholic. He even says in his transcripted police interview, mind you, the one that they rely on all this crap, he says this word for word, and I quote, "I can only say that my recollection was driven by what I saw on the news this morning," unquote. Gee, that's sure came up with their information on their own or from me, and he admitted it, that he saw it on the news. It is also interesting that he was recently released not too long ago and rearrested on theft 3 and indecent exposure. Nice, reliable witness. The second supposed reliable witness is George Tolo, who during his interview with my attorneys indicated that he has multiple mental health diagnoses, takes medication, and has been put into Western State Mental Hospital. He also told my attorneys that if he gets out of prison, he's going to, quote, do something like Boysen did. Great. 2 superstar witnesses that you assholes found to use against me. That makes my family believe that I premeditated this for months and months. Great. Good evidence. Nice, guys. And this is where the media gets all this information from. Where you guys get this gun, bomb, premeditation, killing authority figures crap. I want to kill cops and blacks and Jews and all this stuff. This is where you get that from. Thank you. It is interesting to note, however, that King County Sheriff Urquhart gave a radio interview after I was arrested. In his interview, he mentioned that I had no history of violence, and it seemed out of character for me. It's a long cry away from blowing up in an interview and giving news conference on how dangerous I am. And this was just a short week after. Great. I guess you guys felt free to slander my name and put my family in the news at the cost of people's lives. I also briefly want to talk about my time here at the King County Jail, which my aunt said is the only reason I pled guilty is to escape from here. It's not true. My 7 months here at King County Jail can only be described as traumatic. It shouldn't be, given how most of the correctional staff here either spends time talking on their cell phones, text messaging, browsing the internet on their cell phones, or watching TV shows and movies on their tablets. The fact that cell phones and tablets are even usable at work seems absurd to me. The fact that these items are even allowed in this facility is mind-boggling. The only thing more stunning than the time wasted on the job here is the simple ineptitude of the officer that works here. Maybe that is why in the not too distant past, which you can find out anywhere you look online, the Department of Justice was forced to do a comprehensive investigation on this facility into too many inmates successfully committing suicide. As far as I can tell, the officers who work the court detail here are the only ones who take pride in their work and act with professionalism on a daily basis. I understand that I have not been the easiest inmate to deal with. Since I've been here, I've had 14 instances of self-harm, some ranging from minor all the way up to finding me unconscious and unresponsive. I've had 4 blood transfusions in the time I've been here. I've gone to heart review 16 times. 4 times I've been under the knife for surgery to repair damage or to survive. I feel like that might be a hint that something's wrong. The only way that they felt they could deal with me is to strap me down to a board or to a bed, which seems absolutely ridiculous. My lawyers brought that issue here to court, and even the judge said, hey, it seems like a logical thing to do. You're being willful. I'm not being willful and have not been willful. I have had the urge to die, a compulsion to harm myself that I can't stop. I can't get out of my head. There are other ways to deal with this than strapping somebody down to a board or to a bed. I've now gone over 50 days without harming myself, and that's the longest I've gone here at the King County Jail. It has nothing to do with them having strapped me down. It has something to do with them trying something different, giving me decent mental health care, giving me someone to talk to, maybe trying different medication. They would have you think that I'm just a drug addict, showing drug-seeking behavior, trying to get to the hospital. They look at the records, they don't give me drugs when I go to the hospital. I also have to put up with crude comments from officers regarding my case, my mental health problems, constantly. Even officers who aren't even on my unit, not even working there, will come by just to say something in my window. During a misunderstanding with the officers, I was tased and restrained, which is my fault, I guess. I stood up a little too quickly, too sudden movements. But then I was punched in the back of the head by Officer Drake. That upset me. That really upset me. So when we come to court, we find out that the videotape is missing. In the last 3 years, the only time there's ever been a problem with that video system is right then. In 3 years, the only time it wasn't recording was right then. Seems very convenient. A few days later, Captain Bacon, who doesn't even work in the building that I stay in, he works across the street. He's responsible for the video program. He comes on my unit, asks the sergeant to open my cell and to search my cell. Doesn't even work there. I don't know how he just shows up. It's in the record. You can find it. I'm not just saying stuff. Lo and behold, I then get infracted for paint missing in my room or something. Tear on the caulking. I don't remember what it was. So I get infracted. But of course they're not retaliatory. Of course not. They wouldn't do that here. They're too professional for that. When I ask the officers why it's necessary to strap me down, that it hurts to be straight on my back, they tell me I'm just doing what I'm told to do. I'm just doing what I'm told. It's funny, I'm a history buff. I really enjoy World War II history. I find it fascinating. And I've heard several times in the course of World War II history when they freed the concentration camps, and the officers who work at the concentration camps were questioned. Why did you do it? How could you do something horrible? How could you do something inhumane? You know what they would say? I was just doing what I was told. It's a great excuse in the history of the world. I'm just doing what I'm told. Pass on the buck to somebody else. Strangely enough, that's exactly what they said to the concentration camp workers. I'm just doing what I'm told. Dr. Stanfield, who's the mental health manager here at King County Jail, who's in charge, nominally, I suppose. Because of my lawyers, I have access to internal emails. On several occasions, he's asked the mental health person who's over me to change his wording in his reports, saying that calling my self-injury a suicide attempt should just be called self-injurious behavior, because then it makes it not sound so bad. It's just self-injurious behavior. It's not a suicide attempt. When he was on the stand in one of our court sessions here, was asked about me being admitted to Fairfax Hospital while I was out, asking why. He said it was for drug detox. That is absolutely not true. It was from a suicide attempt. My mom came home, and I agreed to go to Fairfax Hospital for mental health treatment. It was not because of just a drug problem. It was a suicide attempt. He called a lot of my suicide attempts suicidal gestures when he was in the courtroom. Suicidal gestures. You know, it's amazingly hard to kill yourself, emotionally and physically, when you bleed out slowly. It doesn't feel good, emotionally and physically. It's kind of hard to die. That's a suicidal gesture. I apologize for it being hard to die. To me, I find him just another collaborator who's willing to work just for the system and say what he's told. He's just doing what he's told, just like the officers. The biggest collaborator of all, however, a good legal opponent, I'm sure my lawyer would add, is Nancy Balin, who was the defense attorney for the King County Jail. The ultimate collaborator, who in court compared me to a 14-year-old girl because I wasn't really harming myself to harm myself. I was just doing it like 14-year-old girls do it. She would often minimize my injuries, saying in the pictures that were brought to court, it's just a lot of blood. It just looks like a lot of blood. It's not very serious. She even said, you know how it is when you go and donate blood, you can bleed a lot. I find her the ultimate collaborator in this system. As opposed to just the officers, she's like the lawyer who defends the officers at the camps, say at Nuremberg. If you're familiar with the Nuremberg trials, you get that. That's all I have for my time and my stay here and my frustrations at being housed here at King County Jail. I wanted to speak to my family and to those who were harmed, but after hearing the disinformation that my family used, I don't really have the heart for it. You know, and I'm sorry in this doesn't really seem to cut it. My aunt said she was upset that I used an Alford plea. I'm sure the prosecutor explained an Alford plea to her in his biased sense, saying that it was an admittance of guilt. That's not what an Alford plea is at all. The only reason I wanted to use an Alford plea is because I argue the premeditation. And because it drives the prosecutor insane. I have remorse, and I am sorry, whether my family chooses to believe it or not. I hope today by speaking they could get some of their angst and anger out at me. I hope it made them feel better. I'm sure they probably feel that I'll deserve everything that I have coming to me in prison for the rest of my life. I'm sure they feel I deserve to be strapped down to a board, because hey, he's just a murderer. It disgusts me that they've been influenced by the media that they even said isn't reliable. Who knows what the prosecutor told them? I just hope they don't believe everything they've heard. I want to speak briefly about my grandparents, whether anybody thinks I have a right to or not. There are few people in this world I love more than my grandparents. Truly. When my mom said that they were like second parents to me, she was absolutely correct. My grandfather was a second father to me after my parents got divorced when I was 16 and my dad moved away. My grandma could always be counted on to lift my spirits when having a bad day. My grandfather was always a man to look up to, not a drinker. Just throw that out there. Always gave me good advice on how to be a man. I can't believe my family would think that I would choose them. Choose drugs over them. I cannot believe that. Drugs had nothing to do with this. Nothing. I hope someday my family will forgive me. I hope someday I can forgive myself, but I see it as unlikely. Thank you.
Anything you want to say by way of reply, Mr. Gibbs? Okay. Well, unlike the state, I did consider the mitigation that the defense has presented, although I agree with the state that there is no possible sentence here other than
life without parole. I don't think that even if it were possible for the court to consider mitigation, the defense has made out an adequate basis for doing so in this case. Well, I've certainly presented evidence that Mr. Boysen has suffered from traumatic head injury and that may have resulted in cognitive deficits. There's no attempt, nothing in the evidence before me that ties any cognitive deficits that Mr. Boysen suffers to any mitigating circumstances under the statute. The statute provides that the court can deviate down in sentencing when the defendant's capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law was significantly impaired. There's nothing that indicates that any cognitive deficits that Mr. Boysen has an impact on those considerations under the statute, and therefore no factual basis for a mitigated a deviation from the law, even if that were possible. So I'll sentence Mr. Boysen to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. I'll impose the mandatory victim penalty assessment, DNA collection fee, any restitution that may be ordered. I'll also order, as indicated by the state, that there should be no telephone contact with Robert Taylor or Suzanne Campbell. Anything else I need to cover?
Mr. West is going to waive his presence for restitution hearing and answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
that the Boysen execute are appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I'm also handing out the motion certification for an order of interest to the court.
Okay.
We are handing out the national portion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else we need to take up, counsel? No? Okay, thank you, counsel.